is Sergeant Ryan Bykowski going over a few slides about weapons of mass destruction and terrorism as a mandate for the EMR curriculum. So we're going to be going over different ways that terrorism can be used, and we can definitely talk about in specific cases how it was used, or things that we have had incidents with in the town of Manchester. But terrorism, its intended use is to use some sort of violence against a group of people, or as many people as possible. It's like the biggest bang for their buck. Whatever they can do and get the most people affected by it is what they're looking for. So obviously those are different ways for terrorists to conduct some act of terrorism. It says the preferred WMD to date has been explosive devices. That's like IEDs is like your most common thing. Whether you think of IEDs as being overseas, well, in like Afghanistan during this wartime, or it is, someone living on the Manchester road race route that made a small explosive like pipe bombs. It's an IED, and throwing them in the cemetery, to someone who made a little zip gun out of a metal pipe and a shotgun shell. I mean, these are all tools to them used to create some sort of violence towards somebody else. So as far as potential terrorist targets or typical terrorist targets, I mean, in the town of Manchester, we really have to worry about, we have some government buildings, schools, obviously churches, a shopping center, and a hospital is really what we have to, what we have in our town that we have to worry about. This is a depicts deaths in 2001. Shows that terrorism down at the bottom had 2,900 deaths. Obviously, that number I feel is a little skewed based on 9/11. I'd say it's typically, and as far as the U.S. goes, a little bit smaller number than that typically. So as the previous slide said, explosive devices are a common favorite for some sort of terrorist, whether it's domestic or foreign terrorism is concerned. That's just your IEDs, your improvised explosive devices, things that are made that to explode, have the concussion, may have put shrapnel into them to cause even more damage. That's like your pressure cooker at the Boston bombings. That's like this pipe bomb here. Like I was talking about with the person off of, was it Henderson, near the race route by the cemetery, was tossing things around that time, around the time of the race. So we didn't know if that was an issue. Pipe bombs, I mean, you name it. Those are all explosive devices that could be used for terrorism. Whenever we get a call for some sort of explosion or some sort of possible terrorist activity, obviously we're going to have units going to the scene to, start figuring out what's going on, stopping things that can be stopped, helping what we can. But whenever we do have some sort of incident where we believe it's like a terrorism type of attack, where it's like an active shooter or some sort of explosion or something, we want to, along with our initial response, have some people stay back in case of some sort of maybe secondary devices for when first responders get there, so we don't all just get there and possibly fall trap to some other act of violence. So that's always something to keep in mind, which is a hard thing to keep in mind in some cases because you want to get there and you want to help as soon as possible. There's chemical agents, which are typically gas-like, easiest to be ingested because it's in the air. We just breathe it in. Would cause your respiratory difficulties and irritation. Metabolic is just to kind of displace your oxygen. For nerve agents, that's like nerve agents is like sarin gas is probably like the one that is on the top of my head, the most common one. Essentially, whenever there's some sort of nerve agent exposure, you have this acronym sludge to show what your body does in reaction to a nerve agent exposure. And that's salivation, lacrimation, urination, defecation, GI upset, and emesis, which means vomiting. So all those things can happen as signs and symptoms of a nerve agent exposure. I already touched upon it, the sludge acronym and sarin gas being one of the examples of that. Moving on to blistering agents, pretty obvious in the name. It's blister like burns, irritation of the skin. Anytime that we're dealing with chemical agents, we want to recognize the problem first, which could definitely be easier said than done. So you go somewhere, and it might not even be us that has to put it together. The fire department goes somewhere for someone who's vomiting and diarrhea and stuff, and then they go there and they take care of that person. Then they go back 20 minutes later for the same thing in the same area, and they go back after that and after that, and that, before you know it, you have 6 people all with the same signs and symptoms in a small space. That's when we have to start using our brains here and figuring out, hey, that's probably that's kind of suspicious that 6 completely different people in a small area have the same exact signs and symptoms. Maybe something's going on here, and we just have to try to be conscious of that. It's just a table to break down each agent's and kind of a breakdown of odor, lethality, symptoms, things of that nature. Biological agents is a disease processes. That's like your typical like NCIS episode where you have that person who's in the New York subway system coughing everywhere and touching everything and knocking into people and coughing into people's faces, and they're infecting everybody else. That is kind of how biological agents are used. You take an infected person, you sexually weaponize them, and have them make as much contact with as many people as possible. Again, it's kind of like what we talked about when we're looking out for those weird things. If a lot of people are getting these disease-like or flu-like symptoms in an area, then in the same area, then we got to be starting to piece those things together. Proper decontamination once we actually figure out what's going on, and then obviously our investigation to try to figure out how it's being spread. Radiologics, so like radiation is used for cancer and stuff on super low doses, but it could be weaponized with severe exposures, as you can see in the table for moderate and severe exposures, what different ways it can affect the human body. So it could be used for a long time, with grants and things after 9/11. There are definitely even some people. I remember Sergeant Ferran used to have an issued radiologic agent detector on his belt. The Bearcat has one. So that was definitely a thing that people in the U.S. were conscious and scared of, that they could be using some radiological warfare as an act of terrorism So just know that it's out there. It's not extremely common these days, though. It's just a illustration or a picture of a detector, radiation detector. And again, it's just when you respond to these terrorist attacks or possible terrorist attacks, your explosions, your IEDs, things of that nature, we obviously need that initial response, but we also have to know that we need some people to hang back in case something else happens while the first responders are there looking into it, and then we need to call kind of like the experts, the professional experts in which we believe it is. If it's bombs and stuff, then we'll typically have a bomb squad come out, the FBI will come out, it'll be a big thing. So just making sure that we make all the right notifications and take care of that situation as safely as we possibly can. As far as us, like I said, we're kind of the first responders, so we're going to go to a place, we're going to try to identify what's going on to the best of our abilities, and then creating our incident command post, which will be teamed up with the fire department if there are casualties, and getting that whole kind of I can't think of what I'm trying to say here. Trying to get that whole, triage and mass casualty situation taken care of, as well as making the correct notifications to state and federal agencies to get aid in the investigation. And that is all that we have to talk about for our mandate on weapons of mass destruction.